So next up, we have Nathaniel, who can give some insight into Eco Index. Thanks, Nathaniel.
Thanks very much. Kia ora, everyone. I'm calling in from the far north, and we've had no electricity for about 4 hours. So my computer, my stopwatch, everything, my fancy microphone, I was ready to give you a really a flash experience, but I'm going to rely on, I think Erica's going to help click through slides for me, and I'll try not to talk with my hands because one of them's holding a phone. So do bear with me. Um, at this in this meeting right now, I'm representing the work of the Eco Index, which is a team in its fifth year of being financially supported by the Bioheritage Challenge, which is MB money, the Ministry of Business, Innovation, and Employment, specifically their efforts to help scientists conduct research that's industry applicable and potentially can scale. And so that's what this team is all about. I first encountered them about 3 years ago, and I had a great deal of skepticism about whether it was necessary to create biodiversity measurements from scratch in this country. I had a strong suspicion that something already existed globally, that already had a collaborative posture, and that we would be duplicating work. And I spent my first 6 months of helping this team running around and researching what already existed to make sure that we weren't going to be duplicating things, and found nothing. Found some things making noises about their intention to collaborate or making noises about their intention to be relevant. But then when it came to actually picking up the phone and making their repo public on GitHub, nobody was doing that. And so when it comes to biodiversity in particular, there are also things that are quite specific to each country. So I became gradually convinced that not only was this work necessary to do careful biodiversity planning and investment in Aotearoa, but also that nobody else was doing it. So if you can flick to the next slide, the focus that we undertook is to really consider what are biodiversity targets, what are recommendations to reach those targets, and then what are the potential costings, because to move from kind of pure research to something applicable, you want to talk to land managers in ways that they can understand. There's a bunch of complexity that might go into the research that you don't have to explain to everybody that's benefiting from it. So if you can flick through to the next one, the targets, there's a piece of science that I would really encourage you all to become part of helping to mainstream, because there's already enough consensus for it that it's good enough that we all be talking about it. And it kind of rhymes with that 1.5 degree Celsius temperature rise that we don't want to go beyond. But in this case, it's a 15% loss of losing more than 15% of let me start over. You need 15% of the original ecosystem coverage in any area to have a floor that prevents further biodiversity loss. When you have less than that 15%, you can see it in that narrow rectangle, biodiversity plummets. And then you can do whatever you want. You can spend a lot of money to try to save those species, but you've entered an area where it isn't even possible to protect biodiversity anymore. It is in free fall. So there's this target. The UN agrees. There's some difference about whether it should be 15, 16, or 17%, but that's splitting hairs. The idea is if we can get to 15% coverage of the ecosystems that used to exist in a place, and if we can connect them to each other, we can arrest the steepest, most terrifying levels of biodiversity loss. So let's click to the next slide. Because the thing that happens if you kind of buy into this target, and even if you have your own, if you want to set it at 10 because you're the New Zealand government, which they did, or if you want to set it to 20 because you're ecologically positive, good for you. We can adjust. One of the things that you want to then do is be able to say, what was the ecosystem coverage? And then what is it today? These are two mock-ups showing what that might look like around the Waikato area, where you can see from the little part of the slide at the bottom that we're not talking about land cover categories. We're not saying this was forest, this was grasslands. We're actually disaggregating land cover categories into meaningful ecosystems. Like it's different to have a Kahikatea, Pukatea, Tawa forest and a Kauri, Tairere, Koheko, Keko. Like these are very different forests, right? And same with like wetland, fen, bog, marsh, etc. If you skip to the next slide, you're going to notice on the right side, a few little hashed areas appear. And that's where you're saying, all right, you're below 15% now, you're below 15% in these different categories. Where might you add that 15% in to get maximum connectivity between ecosystems so that we can have this floor under biodiversity? Let's go forward one more. The way that this works out for a landowner is you actually just get really simple targets per ecosystem type in your catchment. Really, that's like how a lot of groups think. They're like in our catchment or in our council's region or in across our 15,000 farms or whatever your area is. We can tell you how far off you are from that 15% and how many hectares you would need to be restored to reach it. Let's go one forward. The next thing that that we can do, if you've been kind of tracking this space in Aotearoa, you know that it's extremely sensitive to tell people exactly what they should do with a given piece of land. It's kind of a non-starter culturally and politically, so we don't do it. Instead, we offer heat maps. We would say, look, if you need to restore 20 square kilometers of wetland in your catchment alone to reach what it used to have, this would be the best place to put it from an ecological perspective because of the ecosystem services, because of the connectivity, etc. If that's not an option for you, here's the second best places. And then here's the reasons why. And then here's the third, and here's the fourth, and then don't even bother putting it anywhere else. So the landowners, the iwi, the community, whatever the group is, the catchment group, they have this variety of options available to them, this spatial planning tool that helps them to reach a biodiversity target that has scientific consensus behind it. Next slide, please. Naturally, the next thing landowners want to know is, what does that cost? And so here's another thing that obviously it doesn't apply in other countries. This is like a lot of careful research into environmental economics in Aotearoa. How much does fencing cost? How much does planting cost? How much does trapping cost? Like, we've done the hard yards in building the database to back up these costings so that not only do you know how far are you from the target and where are the places that would help you reach the target, but you know what it would cost you over time to hit that target. And we will have one more column here, which would be, what are the approximate value of the ecosystem services from reaching that target? Because there are benefits to your land in general, whether it be like the purity of the water or the resilience to climate change. There are other ecosystem services that we can kind of weigh up in this ledger. Let's go one forward. The team, like I mentioned, they're in their 5th year. It was $5 million worth of money from the government and across 2 universities and a whole bunch of private consultancies. We already have like significant traction with everybody that's on this slide, right? We've got New Zealand Merino, we've got Fonterra in their second phases of rolling out use of the tool. We've got a number of different iwi. Planet have been kind enough to give us a research license to their finest data, which is like our data scientists are frothing on it and turning up everything that needs to be turned up, including machine vision ecosystem detectors, because that's kind of the backbone of some of this work, is being able to look at a forest and tell not just the difference between pine and native, but 15 different categories of native forests so that you can be specific. So let's go forward one more slide. From my point of view, and I'm not the leader of this team, and this team hasn't even stood up. It's a financial entity yet. It's a research project across universities, but it has some fellows wrapped around it right now. Alex Vega and the team at Co-Created, Stephen Moe and some of the lawyers at Perryfield are helping us look at our ways to go forward. And in every scenario I see, it probably becomes a limited company of some sort to carry on doing what it's doing. So what we need is, I don't think that we need to do a whole lot more talking about like, oh, how do we measure this and measure that? Like, we all are watching things fall apart in real time. This is a good enough product. The MVP was 3 years ago. This is 2 years past the MVP. It has buy-in from government, industry, like across the country. We need people to help build consensus around the science and meme out the key numbers around the targets and sensitize people to the availability of the toolkit. we need people to get their hands on the toolkit, start using it, and then offer kind of practical solutions or suggestions about what would open up a new market and new fields of use. And then, like any project in this area, like, you know, we're not hurting for money, and we've got clients, and I see a lot of likelihood to get non-dilutive grant capital and stuff, and we could carry on bootstrapping this and being successful. But we could do 10 times more if people that are in the impact funding space came in and got behind the team early. So we may also be heading that venture route. So that's me. I didn't have my stopwatch, but I very much hope that was near to 5 minutes, and I'm happy to answer any questions during the breakout or otherwise.
Kia ora.